And thank you all for coming tonight, especially on a pretty important night south of the border. So my name is Richard Martin. I'm going to get straight into my talk. So yeah, I'm going to cover iOS, Firebase and iOS, which is appropriate because this room is largely full of iOS developers. And I've actually done this presentation a couple of times at different meetups. And I do not work for Google, don't work for Firebase, so don't have a dog in this fight. I'm just basically, I use Firebase, gotten into it, and think it's very interesting. And I'd certainly like to get your feedback on things that you're using. And first of all, is anybody using Firebase out there?
I'm thinking about it.
Thinking.
I'm biased because I really like parse. So.
Like parse, okay. Well, there's the parse story that goes, we can talk a bit about that. Have you used Firebase to any extent? Okay.
Is that part of it?
Yeah, AdMob is part of it, yeah. And there's another Firebase user there?
I'm using this one.
Okay, so there's a few, and that's what I've noticed actually. It's, I think we're at the early innings, although I think they're pushing pretty aggressively in their technology. And so in terms of people using Firebase as a server-side or something like an off-the-shelf server-side solution, back-end service. So, and what makes it interesting is I think, and most people I think are using kind of custom back-ends. Is that kind of fair to assume? People, especially Shopify, like 200 Rails developers kind of cranking away. I guess that's a custom back-end there, yeah. But this is a bit different, in that the direction of this technology. I think you being developers should be aware of these changes that are coming and give it serious consideration. So my name is Richard Martin. That's my website. And so a bit about me. I, for a while, worked for this company. I actually worked at Apple Canada for a little while here, and then I went to Cupertino and quite a few years ago. And I worked on that product. People know that product?
Pre-Steve Jobs.
Pre-Steve Jobs, yeah. So it was Apple's first mobile product. And actually, Steve was showing up, kind of coming back as I was walking out the door, as many people were walking out the door. So he just joined the board, because we just bought Next at the time. So that was my experience with Apple and its mobile product. And so there's many stories I have around that, which I will not indulge you in those stories. But many of my friends and colleagues Apple was having some rough times, and they were mostly going to Netscape. I decided I didn't want to go that direction. Networking was getting really big or growing rapidly, and so I went to Cisco, and that was very much the leader in networking technologies and switches and routers and kind of the plumbing behind the internet. And they really did build that. So very much a leading company, and I was there for quite a few years in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley. And from there, I went to Broadcom. So I stayed in networking, but it was the comms, there was the semiconductor side. And so so I would be considered, you guys are probably all work at the application layer. Are you familiar with the OSI stack?
Yeah.
I'm layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4. That's where I kind of spent most of my early part of my career. And I was at both of those companies, I was director of product marketing of several of the product lines there. I was on the switching side. Switching and started to blur with routing because we started putting things in ASICs. So with the product line I worked on, I joined Cisco as an acquisition was coming in. And just to sense the scale of what goes on in Silicon Valley, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but when I went in, the company maybe had $10 million in sales when it came in. And then we launched this product maybe a year after the acquisition occurred. And now that product line that I was responsible for has got to be $6 billion. It's a huge product line. I mean, these are enormous revenue streams that come in. And maybe bigger, I don't know. Like when I left, it was probably $2 or $4 billion. So I was the director of product marketing there, and I was actually also director of product marketing on the Ethernet switch and the physical layer technologies at Broadcom. And actually, when I was at Broadcom, I was the co-author of 10 patents in networking technologies. So at the time, what was happening was 802.11 was really coming on, and 802.11 was like, particularly in the enterprise, well, also at the home too, but we were really focused on, and this so happens every once in a while in technology when they're going through changes, but we were looking to try to get a better sense in our semiconductors, intellectual property about the way that wireless networks interface with wired networks. So like in places like this, to make them more efficient And so we just generated lots of patents, and of which 10 of them came my way. So if you actually, there's a couple of things that I would encourage you to read these patents and look them up. They're on my website. A couple of reasons. You'd learn about networking, which is pretty good. And if you have sleeping problems, these will definitely do the trick for putting you back to sleep at night. So then after 10 years of Silicon Valley, it was time to move on for me. And so I came back home, and we have lived in Ottawa, and our kids came back with us, and our kids grew up in Ottawa. Now they live in different parts of Canada. And so I actually retired for a while. I just didn't want to work for a while. I was kind of burned out, as what happens in Silicon Valley. And I started up with my wife an online service for consultation for clients. She's a physical therapist, so we provide consultation services in Ottawa, but also around the world for clients that have problems with bone health, osteoporosis. So you have an aging population, and this has always become an important problem for people. So we provide education services. We sell products. We actually develop some courseware. We've licensed our course through different parties in the United States. So we have a website that generates quite a bit of traffic and also quite a bit of business for us. So I got into web and online. That's where I learned a lot about my online exposure, the thing about SEO and marketing your services online, especially in the health sphere. Also, I was on several boards here in Canada, of which one was WaveSat. There's 3 or 4 of them. WaveSat, I was actually an independent board member. There was a large investment fund out of Quebec, and they needed somebody with a semiconductor background to sit on the board as an independent. And WaveSat was one of the companies. WaveSat was out of Montreal. Eventually, they were sold to Cavium, which is a network company, a network semiconductor company out of the Bay Area. So I was on that board for about 5 years, I think, and several other ones too. And I actually did some advisory work. Haven't done very much here locally, but I still retain contacts back in the Bay Area. So like one I'm currently involved in is called DXRX, which provides online consultation services for different medical conditions. So I've helped them with a few things over the last year or so. And I got into my own learning development. So I went back, many years ago I did a computer science degree, and I've gone back now to some of my roots and heritage. And ironically enough, I'm back in mobile. So I've kind of come full circle back to mobile. So I've done some iOS development, which you'll see tonight. So that's my background. So let's talk about Google Firebase. So Google Firebase is actually in the last, I think it was a couple of days ago, or maybe it was yesterday, or maybe late last week, they had a fairly big developer summit in Berlin. And before that, they made a fairly large announcement for Google Firebase at Google I/O earlier this year. So Firebase belongs to Google. It was purchased by Google in October of 2014, so 2 years ago. And it's a back-end as service, and it's targeted at web and mobile app developers. I would say right now they're very focused on mobile. If you listen to the messaging and their focus from what I can see. It's a real-time cloud database, which I'm going to go into more detail. I won't be able to cover everything. It's a pretty rich feature set, and it's getting richer almost by the day. It supports iOS, Android, and JavaScript. Android, obviously. JavaScript for web development, and iOS for iPhone development and iPad development. So I'll cover the iOS, but one of the important things to know is that the backend that you develop can act as a backend as a unified backend, an application point of view for an iOS and an Android and a web app. So there's nothing, you just use the same backend, accessing the same, and I'll show you that. I'll get into some real life running of the app itself. So from the user point of view, or not the developer, well, to a degree the developer. A lot of companies, especially early stage, really haven't validated what market they're in or proven things, and really getting a front-end developer or like an iOS developer and then getting a back-end developer to put the whole package together can be a large task. First of all, getting access to that talent can be quite expensive for that startup. And they really don't know, actually, when they put things out there at that stage, they really don't know if they have a market or not for their market, for their customers. They want to have customers. So this, I think, provides a really great way for people to get something out there, really just get an iOS developer or an Android developer, preferably an iOS developer. And for the most part, most, I would think that most Firebase developers can figure out how to get this thing working. It's pretty straightforward. And hopefully I'll show you that to you today. So I think it's really ideal for those early stage startups to validate. Now they grow, they can move away from it and get to their custom back end. But maybe not. The thing has really got unlimited scalability. And it has unlimited scalability because it is from Google. And they really are scaling up considerably. They very much are. They're pretty serious about this thing. And so I think, my impression, again, and I don't know, and I don't want to get involved in the politics or positioning of the thing, but when Parse went down, I think it was seen as Parse was a back end used by a number of iOS developers, and it was taken down by Facebook, and it caused a lot of bad feelings for good reason when that thing went down. And so now it's shifted to an open source. But there's obviously concerns, and I've had this question come up in several meetings, and I don't know the definitive answer, but just observing what they're doing is they really are doubling down, Google that is, on this technology. And I think that they really seem to be very committed to getting it going, from what I can tell. So that's just an observation. I don't know the definitive answer, but certainly I see the investment they're making in the thing, and that's my impression, looking as an outsider, and having worked in these big companies and seeing the things, I just get the signals that they're very real about this. And they're probably very real about this also, I think, because there is very much a market for this kind of technology. Someone's going to get it, and I think it's important to get the leadership position in this. It's also very good, I think, for established companies and agencies. They did, and I didn't get to it on their developer summit there in Berlin, they had The Economist present on one of their applications. So The Economist has enough back-end stuff going on, but they did some kind of app with Firebase as their back-end. And so if you're at an agency and you don't want to have to go harness those resources, those back-end resources, and they're not available, or you have to deal with certain things, but your client wants a mobile app out, this can really solve your problem for you very, very quickly. So actually larger companies can use this sparingly. They don't have to base their whole business on the thing, but they could do certain things with things and get things out fast. So it's got some real advantages. I think as a developer, if I was in your shoes, I'd really encourage you to look at this technology and look at other technologies around it and keep an eye on this space, because what I've seen in my past, in my history of being in the technology industry, is that things always start off, as you probably noticed, as kind of custom development, everything custom development. And that extends all the way from semiconductors to computers to you name it, tends to be a custom design of thing. And even within ASICs, people go like custom ASICs, and then they go from custom ASICs to merchant ASICs. And so what happens is that people kind of realize that, wow, there's a big market there. A lot of the standardization has occurred around certain things. And so it allows people to go like, oh, there's a standard approach to this thing, I'll package it. And when they do that and they achieve economies of scale, then it really can change the market quite dramatically. So it's something I really encourage you from a career point of view to keep an eye on this space. So a little story here. This is a guy named Nick DeVono, and I think he's like 18 or 20 years old. And first of all, I don't know how he's doing that with his feet on the skateboard. And I notice he has his earplugs in. So Nick is also an iOS developer. And in June of this year, 2016, he saw the Pokemon Go thing come out. Of course he did. And as well as every other 18-year-old male out there. And he but quickly recognized with one of his buddies that they didn't have a means to let other people know where they found a Pokemon. So you find this Pokemon here, and then you need to kind of let a community or geographic region where this Pokemon is. And they came up with this idea for PokeRadar very quickly. So they got together, him and his friend, and they cranked this out. And they did it within a week or so, and their back end was Firebase. And they also used something called GeoFire, which is a kind of a geolocator type thing. It allows you to kind of get a group of nodes, I guess, which are in this case would be these Pokemon, into a geographic region. And he leveraged the GeoFire functionality within Firebase. I have not used it. And he developed a PokeRadar. So you see the number one, in June 2016, the number one app on the Apple Store was Pokemon Go. And the number two was his app, PokeRadar. So like many thousands of users in no time. And so, they were cranking away getting this thing going and kept, increasing the functionality of the thing very, very quickly. So they're doing quick turn. I don't think they saw light of day from June till September. And by September, they sold the company for $500,000 to Glue Mobile. Now, this is obviously an event, something unusual happened in the market, and there was a window open for different add-on features or functions that supported Pokemon Go, which took off like a rocket. But I don't think they could have moved as fast without the Firebase back end at their disposal to do that, plus some of the functions that came with the thing. So, just case in point, where someone can do something fairly quickly and scale, because they did have lots and lots of users. I don't know exactly how many they did, but you can just assume that I know that they had, at time he'll have 3,000 or 4,000 email requests coming in on certain features. That's probably just a proxy for the number of users he had on this thing. So it's pretty real. Okay, so just a quick overview of it. Like I mentioned, it's a platform. It's available for iOS support, Android, and web. And supports a whole range of APIs in each of those categories. The web stuff is in JavaScript, and the iOS stuff is in Objective-C and Swift. So they keep it up to date and modern. From a development point of view, this is their stuff on their website. They have a messaging service. They have authentication, which I will show you a bit about that. They have the real-time database and storage. So in my app, I use the authentication real-time database and the storage. They provide hosting services, which is just hosting your website to promote your app. Yes, Fayez?
Sorry to bother you, but is it possible to have one backend to service web, iOS, and?
Yeah, and that's the objective there. So the question was, is it possible to have the same backend service the Android app, the iOS app, and the web app? And the answer is yes. So basically, that's what they want you to do. So you would access the user would access the database through his iOS app or his Android app or the same database.
So if I was to use that approach, would I choose for web or which of the options would I choose? The web version?
Oh, I'll show you. And it's going to be a little bit clearer when I get deeper into that. You don't actually choose anything per se. You choose, if you're working in iOS, if you're developing an iOS app, you use the APIs for iOS to build your iOS app. If you're building an Android app, you go to the Android library. If you're building a web app, which interfaces with this database, so the database is an abstraction away from your app. You use the JavaScript code set. It'll come clearer. Don't worry. Okay, just stick with me. Okay. Hosting, and they have a test lab. The test lab is for Android. It's maybe because there's so many versions of Android out there. And they have crash reporting. They've really put an emphasis in the last week or so at their developer conference on analytics. So the analytics have been developed by the Google Analytics team, and they're really, and I just really trying to catch up with this today before I came here. But they have their analytics, they're very much strengthening up. I'll show you the analytics backend on my app so you can see what's going on. But it's actually, you can actually take the data and export it to, I think it's called, is it called BigQuery? Something like that. I think that was like Big Data? I don't know, what's the name of their service? BigQuery. BigQuery. So you can export to BigQuery and you can get the raw data. You can do all kinds of stuff real time. So there's actually quite a bit of, they really are focusing on strengthening up the analytics story, which is pretty impressive. Not just from a user point of view, but also from a developer point of view, so you can see things going on inside your app as it goes out. And I will talk a bit about that. You can create events and like standard analytics. You can set up events, so you can track what's going on in your thing. So if you do a promotion, you do a notification, you can see what's going on and see if that notification actually spurned events to happen inside your app. You can grow, so there's a marketing analytics thing, there's the AdWords, there's the ad mob, someone mentioned that earlier. Notifications, dynamic links is deep linking, so they're competing against like, is it Breath.io, I think that's the name of the company. So, it's a pretty rich feature set back there. And then the analytics. And I won't spend a lot of time on analytics, but they really are pushing that, they're putting a lot of effort into that. It's largely free, and I'm not gonna go into all the detail here. I mean, you need to scale it up quite a bit before you start hitting paying for it. But you can run it for quite a while free. So, and like the analytics point of view is free, just totally free. Like Google Analytics, there's no charge for the thing. Just in terms of resources, learning resources, and there's more that come out. I kind of like, there's a few that I like. This is a developer out of San Francisco. His name is Brian Voong, and he is a Berkeley guy. He he's an iOS developer for quite a few years of experience. He just is taking a break and developing his own online presence, and it's called Let's Build This App. And he's got quite a bit of iOS development tutorials up there, of which parts of it are Firebase. And he's an extremely knowledgeable guy, and he's a very good developer. I'm really impressed with him. Ray Wenderlich, of course. I just finished this the other day, this tutorial itself, which is building this app. I actually encountered a bug which I wasn't able to resolve, but I got it largely working, and hopefully I'll show that to you too. It does a few things that I didn't do on my app. And then they just came up with a new one, another tutorial where it's more of a chat app using Firebase as the back end.
That's the newest one, yeah.
Yeah, so it came out I think a week ago and it was done by a Facebook guy. So I haven't got that far on that one to look at that. But this is a very good tutorial. I really recommend people. It's a good starting point. He does a good job. I actually took the file and I actually just rebuilt it from scratch. I just want to kind of go through the whole learning experience of how he did certain things.
Udemy, by the way, has quite a few resources.
Udemy also, and actually there's a few more. This just came out today. This is the Firebase Dev Summit, which is up on YouTube, so you can spend time on their channel. And then actually, if I just exit out of here, Google has just put out under Udacity Firebase in a weekend for iOS or for Android by Google, and it's building a real-time chat app with these people here, and these are Firebase people. I haven't tried this; it's brand new. So those are a bunch of resources. Yeah, let's go to that. So there's many, many resources. I just try to identify the ones I've used and think are pretty good quality. And this is the app. I got this up a week ago. It's called Photologger. Originally it was called PHOTO, but some guy got Photologger before I got there. Yeah. And so this is the app I'm going to show to you, and it's up on the App Store. And the back end is Firebase for this. So I won't go to questions yet. I have my own questions, so I'll leave it up to you guys. So let's get into the let's run it and see what goes on here, because I know you guys love code, right? Love code. But before we get to the code, let's look at that. Let's actually go through Firebase itself. When you I'm in my console here, so I'm not at the marketing page, but I've got two apps in a run. This one called Grocer, which is the one that was out of Ray Wenderlich, and Photologger is my own app here. And you can create new projects here. This is an old data one from the original version of Firebase. I have not imported it because I was just playing around with it. So if we look at Photologger here, let's go into a few things. Let me make sure, let's kind of go through it one at a time. Okay, well on the side of the panel here, you get when you start up an app, you get to choose whether you're going to go with iOS development, Android developer, and web development. I've already committed. I'm already in iOS development, so I got access to that library. Go to the docs here, actually. Is it here? So here in the docs, you can actually see here, their online documentation is quite thorough, very impressive. So here's broken down by iOS, Android, and web, and by different approaches. So the getting started. And if you go here, I wanted to bring this up, and I will get to this. I get this can go here. Okay. So it shows you how to walks you through the whole configuration to set up, how to install the CocoaPod. And you can see here the code is in both Objective-C and Swift. So it's very up to date. And it's a very straightforward process of setting it up and getting it going. It is important that you spend time on this and structuring your data. So this is a NoSQL database. So it might be different than what you've used before. It's JSON based. So it's like key value and things like that. They are pretty careful here. And if there was one part that I would read before I started is structuring your database. So you need to spend time on that. I'm not going to give a tutorial on this, but basically they do talk about a good design, which is just here users with different fields underneath, but best practices. But a bad design is one where you get nested data. So if we start going out and out and out. If the JSON file starts getting like this and lots with these embedded, probably not doing the right thing. It's going to cause you some heartache and problems on your app side when you're trying to get access to the database. And this thing can also work offline. You can persist data to some respect. I've tried to have a few things on and off with the thing. So it supports the database. It's got authentication. So I'm going to bring you through the database. I'm going to bring you through authentication. And I'm going to bring you through storage. Storage is something they brought up with the new version of Firebase, this version. The version before, you had to put your storage, like your media, somewhere else. So you'd use like Amazon or something else. And so it was a bit of a pain. But this time around, storage is an integral part of Firebase. So it's all in one location, which is nice. That's a good improvement. Okay. So let's where should we go here? Let's start with the authentication, because that's the first thing that typically happens with the user. And here the app is out, and you can see that people have been logging in. Not many, but some people have been logging in. And then logging in via Twitter and Facebook and email, you can have different sign-in methods that you can enable. So in this case, I enabled in this app email and password login, which is handled by and authenticated by Firebase. You can enable Google, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, and an anonymous setting. I, for my app, just enabled Facebook and Twitter because I wanted to go through the experience of that. When you develop your app, you're going to still have to go through the process, and in the case of, say, Facebook and Twitter, which is what I had to go through, you still have to go to Facebook and Twitter to get the credentials. When you get the credentials, you bring them down, and then you hand them to to Firebase for the authentication process. And I'll show you what that code is.
Would you still use Facebook's and Twitter's API for the setting up the login on the app?
Yeah, you have to go through, I mean, the whole process of identifying your app in Facebook or in Twitter, that whole process you still have to go through. So be prepared to invest time and some struggles to go through that. And the other thing about the Facebook in particular, which I found a bit frustrating, is that it's Objective-C. You know, it's like, you know, come on, guys. So I thought that was a bit odd, although I think they're coming up with a Swift version. And Twitter was, the documentation inside of Firebase docs for Twitter were more like a kind of a static Twitter button that was in the middle of the page of the view controller. And obviously I didn't want to do that. So I had to kind of go through, I can't remember, I went through a whole pile of steps to set up my own custom button and different things. So you're going to have to be prepared to spend time working on the Twitter and the Facebook side before you get to the Firebase thing, because you got to get this credential process working, okay? And I'll share the code. And the code itself, by the way, is up on my GitHub account. So you can just go down and download it if you want to. I mean, it removes both things, but it's up here under Photologger. So you can go there, and I've taken out I've taken away the plist from Google, you know, because it's got all the credentials in there and stuff. So you have to put your own up and set up some of your own things to get it working, but it's there. So it's open source. Where were we? So, yeah.
What does anonymous give you?
Yeah, so I don't completely understand it. It allows you, go ahead.
From my understanding, it allows you to have people come onto the app like as a token, like right when you try it, and then you can, if they like do settings or change things within the app, you can like subtract their behavior. So then when they make an account, it still keeps that whole.
Yeah, that's right. So that's good. So did everybody get that? So the anonymous setting is basically so that you don't freak people out. Here, sign up for my app, so they can go through anonymous, perform anonymously, and then they can log in after the fact. And the credentials, their profile is kept.
So you can use that account to track information about it?
Yeah, it's going to be on your analytics. You'll see it on that side. So you'll see anonymous users. I don't have anonymous on mine, but it's not a bad idea to.
So you can create fields in there that you can store information, or in a separate link to it at the table. Do you get a pointer to that user that you can?
Let me go into the database. Okay, I'm getting ahead of things here. So let's just stay in authentication. So I'll just walk through. Let me just kind of go through the authentication process. I'll run the app. The app is running, so just get it here. You can see here I have Facebook login and Twitter login. I won't fire those. I'll just do an email login, which is an account that's already set up. Uses a very secure password. So if I log in, it brings down the posts that are up there. So this is represented by the database here. Let's kind of go through this. So just from my camera on the phone, I just did this one here, so at the score. So obviously I can share it using the activity view controller right here. And I can delete the post. And then if I want to edit the post, I just go into it and make some changes here, so I can change the text and things like that. So it captures the date and time, the location, and some of the fields that I provide when I do something. So let's go into the database. And if we look here, let's just actually go back to the users. And that user is this guy right here. So you see he gets a unique ID right here, this GJ7 It gets assigned by Firebase. So if we go to the database, we'll find him. So you do have to spend some time, and the way I've set up my database here is I have posts and I have users. So I create users, and there's that user right there, me, right here. So we see he came in as the provider was Firebase. So we get certain information. By the way, so when you do that, So I don't know if you can add fields, but I know there's certain fields given to you by Firebase on a user. I can't remember what they all are. If we go into the post, what I've done here is I have the posts associated with the user. This is how I did it. There's any number of ways to do it. So because what happens is that obviously when someone logs into their app, they log in as their user. They don't want to see everybody else's photos for obvious reasons, unless it's a social app. But in this case, I wanted it to be a closed app for that user. So the posts that are associated right here are here, so for this user. So I just opened this guy up here. So it says here, an hour ago, 15:46 or so, was it? I think it's off by time here for some reason. So I'm, presenting a Firebase at the score. Sorry, there it is right there. So there's that, right? So you see the presenting a Firebase. There's the fields that I created. I create the fields. I can create the, there's several ways you can approach the development of your app, however you want to do it. So if you look at the way the Ray Wenderlich tutorial works, now he kind of developed the whole app, so he'd obviously developed the app in the absence of, when he put it up on Ray Wenderlich, it was done, so he'd already got it all planned out. But when I was developing this app, the first thing I did was like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a table view and I want to populate it from Firebase. That's the first thing I'm going to try to solve, right? So what I did was I just created dummy database entries. And I just got basically the table view to talk to the Firebase and start pulling down data. That's all I wanted to do. But when you kind of get going, you can create your data structures inside your app that can then populate the database itself, right? So you can kind of go the other way, and that's what we're doing here. So I create an entry here, and then it just populates here. So, but the way I've got it coded is associated with that user, which is this GJ71, which is my email address, and these are the different entries. So if I go in here and I go to delete this thing, and if you pay attention to this one right here, and we hit delete, it goes, it disappears. So it's real time. There's no reloads, none of that kind of stuff going on. And it works the opposite way. And I'll show you that in the other app. Actually, it's one of the other reasons why I'd probably encourage you, if you really want to get into this, the Ray Wenderlich app, the grocery list, it shows you the other way, so it's loading your table view real time, which is kind of cool, right? So both ways is kind of remarkable. So if we go and we want to, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a location setting here because it's a good idea to do that, right?
There's no need to implement push to reload,
No.
pull to refresh, sorry.
No, there's no pull to refresh. If you don't need to pull the refresh, exactly that on your table view. And I'll show you, it's not on mine, but on the other app, if we have time, I'll show you that it just like does it. And you can do queries and you can do sorts from Firebase, and the source will appear on your table view, real time. Now you're using bandwidth, I understand, but it's kind of remarkable to watch it. So if we get time, I'll go to the other app and just show you that at work. So you can query the database. You can look for fields and say, I want to sort on whatever. So we'll get to that. Is it caching your data on the device? Is it caching the data on the device? I don't know. I don't know.
You can turn it on if you want to persist the session, and then to have offline mode.
Yeah, I can't hear. I know.
You can turn it on and off, like for it to cache.
Inside the phone or?
Within the Xcode within the iOS app.
Yeah, so I have turned on persistence. So if you go up here to the app delegate, you'll see, right? Where is it? Persistence enable true. That's all I needed right here.
So
That does it. So it does cache if you go on airplane mode, it will hold on. Does that answer your question? Where were we? I can't remember where I was onto something, and it was great. But no, I set the location. So let's keep an eye on the database here. Oops. So keep an eye on the database. Again, looking at this user here, because this is who we're in with. And if we add something, and let's get a photo. I'm sure you've never seen these before, these images. Has anybody seen these images before? Oh, okay. It's called a little stream, that's what I call it. So we just put that in and, oops. Save the post. There it is there. Right. And so you see it real time here, appear and disappear. So covered the authentication from this side, cover the database. I'll go into the code. And then there's the final part is the storage, which is where the media goes. And this is a different area. And so you encourage you to do compression on this thing. But if I go and find here, if you go find this last one here, November the 8th, this one, the Starbucks one, I just took it when I was sitting at Starbucks. If we go November the 8th, I got to be careful here what I open because I don't want something like showing up that's not permissible among families. Come on. Oh, this is a little stream one. Anyway, you kind of get the point here. So remember, this must be, this one right here must be this. There's the Starbucks one. Right. So you see the storage is held here. So it also is URL based. Everything is URL based. But you don't really use URLs inside the app. So if we go into the code, what you use is the given commands that Firebase gives you. Okay? So once you install your CocoaPods and you're up and running, and then you enable, you do things like import Firebase, then as you start doing that, and let's go through the login protocol here. You'll see that we import Firebase, and what are we doing here? So in this case, the authentication. So the authentication, this is all Twitter stuff. So I had to go get the credential from Twitter, and then I had to get the credential. I had to hand the credentials right here through this, excuse me, this function I wrote here called Firebase authentication. Oh yeah, so the credential is equal here to we did use this. See this piece of code here? This comes from Firebase. So this Twitter authorized provider credential, and it gives you a token with a secret. And then I call, and this is the same in the Facebook is the same approach. I then call this function here, and then what happens is fire auth, which is an authorized user.auth with a sign in with the credential. In this case, it's a sign in with the credential. For email, would be sign in with email right there. So this is the email login process. So all these methods with the completion handlers are all provided by Firebase. So when you install the CocoaPod, you import the Firebase, and you import all the key modules, then you get access to this full library of features. Okay, and they're all documented up on Firebase's website. So you create the user. I don't need to kind of go into, I mean, again, someone wants to go through my code, feel free to do that. So the same thing applies then. So another thing you do is you can also observe, right? So with the .observe, you're able to see by putting that code inside of anywhere in your code. When it came to, say, the login, I also was able to observe, say, is that user already logged in? So I don't have to force somebody to log in every time. And so you can also do it observe for any changes on any of the posts. So if there's a new post, there's a modification of the post, you do changes according to that. So if you see any changes occurring, I gotta go find that stuff right now. It's like, oh, see, they said the .observe right here. So in this case, Firebase in the main view controller is monitoring and seeing if, in the case of the current user, it observes and see if the child had changed. Okay, so it sees that change and captures it there. What else? So the important, actually, I realize I'm kind of jumping around here. I did set up a separate data service here. So a singleton is how I did it. And so here, let me just close this down here. What I did is I set up these right here. So there's two references I had to set up. One for the database, using the FIR database, and the other one for the storage, because they have to be handled separately through different separate methods, okay? So in this case, I got the database with its reference, and I set this up. And then you can get a child. So one of the childs or children is posts of the database, and the other one is users. So if you remember back on the database here, I had posts and I had users. So posts and users now are accessed with that .child, with that name, that specific string. And this function is just a function I wrote that creates the user that I call inside my view controller.
Richard, what's the conceptual difference between the database and the storage base?
The storage is, well, the database you can set up, you have a bit more control in terms of what you set up. So you can set up the fields that you want, structured the way you want. The storage is less, you don't have any, you just are receiving things and you're putting things there. Really only the control on the setup here, on the storage, are these folders here at this level. Okay? So you create a folder, generally it's advised. But URL-based, it's the same. But you're not using URLs again because they're giving you the method calls. So when I set up the singleton here, this, at the end of the day, is a URL pointing specifically at that database, right? And then access to that database from this app is controlled from this plist, which gets downloaded during the install, which all the detail and credentials are handed to me so I can access that database and I have the rights to access that database. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so the storage, just to summarize, you're not really setting up a lot in there. So when you start it, it's empty, and then you start populating it. And you delete it, obviously. I mean, one of the things I want to make sure is when the user deletes a post that it gets deleted too, just for, overload the database or the storage base. Yeah, okay, so I covered authentication. I covered the login procedures. We covered the database. What else? Anybody think of anything else? The snapshots are basically so those are really it's the array that you call pull down to go through things. So if you let's go in here. So here you just call down the snapshot, and then basically the snapshot is the object. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, my experience is using the snapshots. Even if you have a little bit of information nested within, like a few notes in, using SwiftJSON is really, really handy to be able to get at those, like at the values
Oh, okay.
of snapshots, and then dealing with the optional SwiftJSON is really good with that.
Oh, okay. So it gives you another layer. Go in there deeper. Yeah.
Keep going.
Okay, that's a good point. I didn't use that. I never went that far.
Yeah, because then you can go child by, you can define into which node you wanted the snapshot to come from, and then you can either get one hierarchy and you can dig in, or you can get into the node directly where you want it to go.
Oh, okay. So there's another layer of value there, I think. Yeah, it's kind of cool. I didn't do that. Okay, so that covers that. I got one more thing. So if you want me to, I'll just basically run the other app. Because I wanted to show you the reverse, in terms of that you can do things on the database and you'll see things occur on the table view. So this is the app that, let's kind of switch over here to this one. This is a grocer app. It's just a grocery list. Let's run that one. And so we'll have to switch over to that database. So we just go, it's a bit simpler. Oh, and yeah, actually, remind me I have to do analytics. I promise you that. Let's take a look at that. But before we do that, let's go ahead and look at that database. And this is fairly simple. It's just adding items to a shopping list. I think the user's already logged in. So you see here's a fairly simple process. I've logged in with this user ID, which is this one right here. So if we just add something, here he uses a alert controller. And let's get some beer and save it, and it appears there. He's got a bunch of things that I think are kind of interesting. So he allows you to, so he uses this .observe. If I go over here, okay, if you look right here, talked about this observer and then being able to do a query. I didn't do this query functionality, but you have this query ordered, so you have a whole pile of queries you can do to the database and manipulate the data. So in this case, he sees if something's completed, a task is completed. Like in essence, we bought the beer, for example, and he observes. And then he basically to monitor any changes to the database. But he can also sort. He does a sort based upon that. Somebody does that. I can't remember where it is. So if I go over here to the app, and if I click the apples, you can see just real time, it went to the bottom. So it observed the change, and it made the change real time on the table view. And over here, if we, this identifies the number of users online. I won't do a user, I'll just add one here. I'm going to keep that. Just create, and if we just add it, you'll see that user shows up right there. So you can see how it populates real time on both sides and orders, you know, so it can do queries real time, and then those queries are going back, was initiated from your app to the database, and then the sort occurred right there on your table view, real time, which is kind of amazing. So it's a two-way street from that point of view. Okay, so those are kind of the key things. I want to go through some of the analytics, and there is a new rollout, I think, and I don't know when it is, but they announced it at this dev thing in Berlin of analytics that are available, that are coming, that allow you to do things like export your data and your analytics data, that is. So you do get things like crash reporting, but if you go into the analytics, you'll see that it's a fairly rich console unto itself. Assuming it comes up. There it is. So you can have the dashboard, obviously, like a standard analytics thing. But you can set up events. You can set up funnels and attributions. So, yes, sir?
How much does this analytics overlap with Google Analytics?
Yeah, so I think you're going to see right now a little bit. It's just a subset, I think, of the functionality of analytics. I use analytics on one of my sites, which can be pretty gargantuan. I mean, it's fairly large, you know, especially when you want to set up events and things like that. So they're pretty similar, but my understanding of this was developed by the Google Analytics people. And I think that they're bringing more of it together, and I think they're trying to position this potentially as the analytics engine for mobile. That's my impression based on what I'm hearing them say. Okay, so that, I'll just go through some questions that have come up. I know you guys have had some good questions for me. So let me just go through these. So can I export my data from Firebase? Let's assume I change my mind later on. The answer is yeah, if you go over. If we go into the database itself, over here is the export. So you can export the JSON file. Some people have asked for server-side custom code, because right now you can notice that you really are relied upon their methods that they provide. And can I put in custom code? And the answer right now is not today, but my understanding is they're going in that direction. What they have written is a blog post right here, which is, you know, how does it fit into your app? This is on their blog. And you see here, this is how most people do it, or I've done it in my app. You have different interfaces, mobile interfaces, desktop interfaces, accessing this Firebase database, which you just kind of use as I've used. But if you want to do something where, oh, I want to go through the data, and then based upon stuff that's going on here, I'd like to trigger certain events, call certain APIs, call Twilio, for example, to text out something. How do I do that? That's a good question. Well, I guess you could kind of arm wrestle your way into your iOS app, but that's probably not recommended. What they're suggesting here, and this is maybe 1 or 2 years old, is use the web interface to develop like a Node.js server solution that interfaces with the same database, notes and does an observe, put an observer on any changes in this database, and then fires based upon that. So it's away from, it's not on the iOS side, it's on the server side. So there's 2 servers in effect. I mean, it's an issue because then you're developing here, and dealing with this. But my understanding is, again, I think, is that they're going to provide more custom code. I know Parse provided some level of custom code, and I understand that they're going in that direction. Okay. Obviously, if you're doing database, you might want to separate the production from development in terms of the database itself, but you can have multiple databases, and once you feel comfortable, then you can switch it to a production database for obvious reasons. I've had questions about end-to-end authentication and security, which means basically is the data that people, like can you restrict the administrator access to different user accounts and stuff like that? And what I can tell, the answer is no. I mean, you saw I had access to all the stuff that's being posted. And transitioning from Firebase to a custom backend, well, you need to go through things through re-authentication. That I don't know the answer. I think you'd probably have to go through something. I noticed today when I heard them talk was that the other way around is they're allowing you to bring your custom front end or back end, which has authentication already done with those users, and bring them in seamlessly into Firebase without having to go through a re-authentication. That's what they said. So, I don't know the other way, but maybe, maybe not. But expect to see more functionality based on what I'm hearing see and them talking about the direction of this product. And finally, querying the database came up, and I showed you the queries that are available. And there's a whole library of calls that one can make to it to get access to certain information that's captured inside those fields. Thank you. So that covers my talk.
I saw in the beginning you showed that it supports push notifications as well, or a notification
Yeah.
system. If it's not supporting server-side code, is that completely triggered by some kind of observation on properties or something? How does it work if there's no server-side code?
Right. Yeah. So I didn't get that far in my app. It'd be kind of a neat thing to do. If you go in here, they do have notifications right here, and you can track them. I know on the analytics. So if you do a notification call out for certain things, you can do it by segment, by topic. Now, how you initiate it, is it triggered by certain events? I don't know, and I didn't get that far, so I can't answer your question with confidence. But I do know that it's out there. I do know that when I submitted my app, they did come back and say, you seem to have notifications. And I said, no, I'm using these Firebase ones, or not using them, they're just there. So they sensed it. And then they didn't put me through the ringer for it. The Apple people didn't. But, but it's also on Android. So exactly how it works, I don't know. What triggers it? Is it something that you would do just to do notifications? I don't know how to do it. But notification functionality, they say, is there. Yes? No, I did.
Does Firebase use WebSockets for the real-time communication?
I believe they do, yeah, that's how they do it.
And what does it do for web browsers that don't support WebSockets?
I don't know the answer.
Yeah, when you show the observation, do they provide a way to terminate the observation?
Oh, question was, in the observation, does it provide a means to terminate the observation?
Yeah. There's a method called remove observer.
Okay, there's your answer. You should be presenting this stuff. Yeah.
Do you know if their clients will build under tvOS?
Oh, well, it's iOS.
Not really, not really.
Is the framework open source?
No. It's Google, man. I mean, they've open sourced certain things, but this is not open sourced.
Is there a REST API you can build on top of
I
it?
believe so, yeah.
So you build it yourself.
Right there.
You can build it yourself. Are there any higher profile apps that you might have heard of other than the Bookie Radar?
Yeah.
Use Firebase?
Yeah, they had some of them at their dev conference. I mean, The Economist is using it. Somebody named Glide, Alibaba. Yeah, they're at on their dev conference. They had this week. Don't ask me. I'm sorry. Like I can't keep up. Like I'm trying to keep up with this stuff myself. It's just like a fire hose.
Behind Alibaba's Firebase.
I don't know. You're gonna.
So in your app, can you see posts made by other users?
In my case, but me as a user.
Well, I mean, if you wrote it there, like, if you try to access posts made by other users, are they visible? So can one user see posts? Can you just request them from the database? And restrict that? Do they have support for that? Do you know what I mean?
Okay, so are you talking about me as a developer or are you talking about me as a user?
Well, both, really. I mean, what I'm saying is someone logs in as an individual.
Right,
They post their own posts.
right.
But could you write code that uses their authentication to see other users'
Yes,
content?
yeah, you can do you can make a social app out of it, if that's your question.
Can you restrict it from doing that at the same time?
It is now, so basically the only person that sees my post is
No,
me.
like, could I hack your app, take your credentials, use them, and log in and see other people's stuff with my credentials? Like if you put a man in the middle. It's basically a scoping question.
It depends what you set on the rules.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
go into
So
go back to your console. So if you go into the rules and under authentication, there is where you can set different rules depending on who has the read or write
Okay.
Yeah.
permission.
So you get a private data and public data.
You can do it that way, yeah.
In your Xcode project, you had a plist
Depends on what
that had all your API
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
Is that built into the app?
access.
Is that loaded at runtime?
Uh,
If someone unzipped your IPA, could they get your API key?
um, that, when you build the app, I know one thing, I didn't put it up on GitHub. Does it get with the,
If you go to Xcode, sorry. Yeah. If you go to Xcode, highlight the file, look on the right tab,
The products?
products.
Sorry, under the products folder there, a little bit couple down.
on the product right here?
No,
On
the
the
product,
left-hand side, the navigator,
in the outline,
yeah. Scroll down, or
Not
go
the
down,
menu.
there's, it says product, the folder tree there.
right there. Yeah, right
Show and
click
Finder.
and show and finder. And then show package contents.
Oh, this is the wrong, well, yeah.
You're right. You're right. It'll
Yeah,
still
you're
show
there.
us.
So,
Right click on the app. Show package contents. And yeah,
There
it's
it
right
is.
in there.
It'll service
Yeah, it's right there.
Well, if you're not through Charles,
If you download the app to iTunes and then change the extension to .zip and then double click it, it'll expand and you can.
I don't even think we need to
so are there any secrets in
change
there?
the
That's
extension.
the-
Like,
There was
like open with.
There was an API key in there.
There's, yeah.
That stuff should be kind of hard coded in code, not in.
They can just open it up in OTool and dump
They
the
could-
text
they
section.
could.
Yeah.
That's your point.
This is a little too easy.
If they want, if they get ahead.
Go ahead.
I have a question. So when you showed this kind of a tree of the objects,
I didn't hear what you're saying.
sorry, when you showed this a tree of the objects as they stored in a database,
When I show a
Tree.
sorry.
yeah, it's kind of a very different way of how the data is represented in a database. Usually they
Yeah.
use tables.
Yeah,
So in tables are convenient, and you can like apply filters
yeah.
easily. Is there something like filter for the view of on this tree? Like if I want to go and look at my user's data, like and find something and filter something, can I use this console?
So the only thing is, I haven't got that far. The only thing is the doc query. So you can do queries, but in terms of filters, I don't know.
Use the web interface.
Yeah, I may write my own interface to go and talk to a database and present the data as a tables. I'm asking if Google's web interface provides this now.
You're talking about their web APIs?
No, the admin interface. The admin tool, like the console.
Right here.
Yeah.
Can you filter?
No, I don't think so.
So if you have millions of things. It's just a browser.
Right.
You or anyone here have experience with the Mac SDK that they used to provide with 2x? But they, I think they kind of dropped it off. Like I couldn't find it on their site. They used to have this great Mac SDK for Firebase, but I think it's gone, and they don't seem to support it.
I don't know. Sorry.
Code base for what? Sorry, like the Mac OS could probably use exactly the same code if they just recompiled it. It would work fine. It's not supports the Mac.
Okay. Any more questions?